On this edition of Southern Newsweek, a memorial to conscientious objectors is officially opened, researchers study concussion in rugby, and a historic Dunedin church is to be turned into luxury apartments. Kia ora, good evening, I'm Melissa Barton. A new memorial to those who didn't fight in World War I was unveiled in Dunedin recently. Named after conscientious objector and local man Archibald Baxter, the opening ceremony was attended by a top government representative.
The Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson and other dignitaries were joined by a large crowd for the official opening of the Archibald Baxter Memorial Peace Garden and National Monument to Conscientious Objectors in Dunedin today. Peace advocate Kevin P. Clements says it's a fitting addition to other monuments around the country.
You know, there are thousands of monuments in New Zealand to war victims and no monument at all for those who chose a different path.
The monument is a stylised representation of local identity and conscientious objector Archibald Baxter enduring Field Punishment No. 1, which saw him tied to an angled stake for many hours on the enemy front during World War I.
And in New Zealand we have a lot of memorials to those who fought, and that's the right thing. But it's very timely to have one to those who showed the courage of their convictions to be conscientious objectors. And Archibald Baxter was, a person who showed enormous courage and leadership.
Grant Robertson more or less apologised on behalf of the state for the punishment that was meted out to Baxter.
Those behind the memorial and garden hope it will inspire visitors on the way of peace. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Otago University researchers have been studying the issue of concussion in rugby, from grassroots players through to the Otago and Southland provincial teams. Specialised mouthguards have been handed out to Southern players, measuring the impacts when players collide or hit the deck.
It may just be a game, but concussion in sport is a serious business. New Zealand rugby researcher Danielle Salmon has fitted many of these Otago players over the years with custom mouthguards which measure and track their performance.
If the proximity sensor is close to the teeth, what happens is it's set at a threshold of 5 Gs. So if I'm running along and, bump shoulders with somebody or make a tackle and go into contact, what that does is it triggers the mouthguard to capture data.
Players from Otago and the Stags are taking part in a pilot study funded by New Zealand Rugby, World Rugby and Otago University. 700 mouthguards were handed out this year to players from beginners through to professionals. Researchers hoping to learn how to make the sport safer and potentially save lives.
And that is always the hope, is that, with this training technique, if we better understand the game, then, hopefully we can use this to better coach how, men, women, our high school kids play. And then, ideally that makes it safer and potentially minimizes, injuries that can happen.
It's been a first introduction to rugby for the Canadian researcher who grew up watching gridiron. The high-tech mouthguards collect data when impacts occur. Early results show female players are more likely to suffer head injuries, and Salmon wonders if earlier training might help.
Using some sort of intervention program, whether it be, neck strengthening exercise to try and, strengthen neck when they go into impact, or looking at, tackle technique training, or training these girls how to fall properly, so potentially reducing the impacts you see when their head does connect with the ground.
So far the studies have been taking place in Otago, but researchers are ready to spread the net further and study what happens when bodies collide on the field. In Dunedin, the South Today.
A Dunedin researcher has discovered which method of treading water is the best to use if you get into trouble while swimming. Out of the number of various water treading techniques, it turns out the egg beater stroke uses the least energy while you wait for help.
Kiwis love going to the beach or swimming in rivers and lakes over the summer, but unfortunately some get into trouble and end up having to tread water until they're rescued. Knowing which water treading technique takes the least effort could help save lives, as a lot of drownings occur after exhaustion. Research by Tina Van Doon from the University of Otago School of Physical Education found the egg beater technique is the least exhausting of the water treading methods.
People tend to do different types of movements when they are trying to tread water. For example, an upright breaststroke technique that is very simple and easy to execute, or a kicking movement with the legs, etc. So we wanted to actually compare them against each other to really find out which one is most economic.
Van Doon is planning to investigate her initial findings in more depth, with research potentially challenging the way water safety is taught to youngsters.
We can inform teaching, water safety teaching and swim instruction. So what kids learn when they first learn to tread water will hopefully become more evidence-based.
And because swimmers need to relax and keep their wits about them if they're in trouble in deep water, the egg beater technique was also found to be the least mentally draining.
Right, so when people are in a drowning scenario, they often have to multitask, so they don't just have to perform movements, but they also have to make decisions and process a lot of information. So we tested also how cognitively challenging each of those movements is.
Van Doon's initial study was limited to a small group of experienced swimmers, with her next step to see whether the same technique is the best option for inexperienced swimmers as well. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Few family projects are as ambitious as the one the Wilkinson family has begun, turning a historic Dunedin church into luxury apartments. Roger and Pauline Wilkinson bought the old church building in North East Valley early last year, moving in just before the first COVID-19 lockdown hit.
There's more than meets the eye for a former Melbourne-based family who have ambitious plans to transform the former St David's Presbyterian Church in North East Valley.
1 and 2 people in each apartment so that it doesn't change the character of the neighbourhood, which we're quite concerned about, and also concerned about the building. It doesn't lend itself to being 48 flats full of people. It'll just be a nice neighbourhood, nice environment.
The Wilkinsons had been living in Melbourne prior to lockdown last year and planned to travel to Dunedin once a month to visit family and help out with school runs.
Oh, we're picking the kids up from the school 3 doors down. And looking around for a weekender, bed and breakfast or something, and Pauline said, "Oh, this place will be perfect." I said, "Don't be stupid, wouldn't you be able to afford something like this?"
After buying the 19th century church building early last year for about $330,000, the family has been working hard on renovation plans. A lot of time so far has been spent sourcing resource consent, council permits, pricing and finance.
It'll probably be a 4-year project in total. Whether we do that in 1, 2 or 4 hits, we'll find out, COVID depending and all those other things. Get back to normal life, it might be different. So.
The church building near Baldwin Street was previously in private ownership, branded as the Maker's Place. The English-style church was built in 1885, with additions by Edward Anscombe in 1912. It has a fully working bell tower and is a Category 2 listed building with Heritage New Zealand. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Coming up after the break on Southern Newsweek, a Dunedin harbour ferry will only take vaccinated passengers and fish numbers are counted in the Greenstone River. Welcome back. A Dunedin harbour ferry is saying no to unvaccinated passengers. Skipper Rachel McGregor wants to take only vaccinated adults on the daily journeys as a way to keep children safe from COVID-19.
Dunedin Wildlife Tours skipper and port-to-port operator Rachel McGregor is taking a stance. She's planning to only take passengers who are vaccinated. She says she's doing it to keep younger passengers safe, giving children the same safe environment as they get in schools.
Because I take a lot of children on board and the schools soon will have it mandatory for teachers to be vaccinated, for me it doesn't really make sense then for them to, go on holiday and go and do activities where all of a sudden they're exposed to a whole lot of people that haven't been vaccinated. It just doesn't really make sense. It's inconsistent.
The business offers wildlife tours of the harbour as well as a daily ferry service between Port Chalmers and Portobello, which is popular with cyclists doing a loop of the harbour. McGregor admits that not all other tourism operators will necessarily follow her lead.
To me it makes sense to be to take that stance. But I realise that people have their own opinions as well, so I guess I'm just doing what feels right for us.
McGregor wants to only take double vaccinated people, but she'll make allowances for those waiting for their second dose of the vaccine. She'll ask passengers to prove their vaccination status through the COVID app or a vaccination card. But until the official vaccination passport comes into place, the policy will be based on trust.
People seem to be pretty supportive so far, so especially families with children. I've got a young boy myself, so I personally would feel more comfortable visiting somewhere that has the same sort of policy as what we do.
A firm date is yet to be set on when New Zealand's vaccine passports will be issued or exactly how they'll operate. In Dunedin, the South Today.
The high country fishing season opened recently with 8,000 anglers set to take to the water this season. And ahead of the opening, Fish and Game officers surveyed more than 10 kilometres of the Greenstone River to count fish numbers.
A nice relaxing drift down the Greenstone River to survey the population.
Drift dive survey involves 2 people in the water swimming down the river together, and they're counting both rainbow trout and brown trout, medium-sized and large fish. And then we've also got 2 people going along the edge of the river, and they are counting fish as well.
The divers and walkers swam and walked around 13 kilometres of the Greenstone River ahead of the high country fishing season opening, although there are more fish in the rivers than the team actually spot.
Divers see about 60% of the fish that are in the river, so those numbers we're giving are just an estimate, and there are more fish out there than what we're observing.
Otago Fish and Game officer Ben Sowry is one of the men who snorkeled down the river counting fish. While they haven't seen huge numbers, the fish he and fellow diver Cohen Stewart spotted were great specimens.
The rainbow trout are in excellent condition, nice and fat. The brown trout numbers are even lower, however the ones that we have seen are very good fish. We've seen several which are trophy sized, above the old-fashioned 10-pound mark.
Drift dives in the Greenstone began in 1987 and were repeated in the 90s and 2000s. The exercise showed encouraging signs for the future of trout in the area.
So we have seen quite a few spawning reds being the nest sites for the trout, where they dig a hole in the gravel, lay their eggs and then cover them back over with gravel.
Each year, around 80,000 anglers get a fishing licence in the South Island. The Fish and Game team counted 107 medium-sized and large rainbow and brown trout on 3 sections of the river. In central Otago, the South Today.
A special treat for young bookworms hit shelves last weekend. The Wonky Donkey is an international bestseller, inspiring songs, soft toys and sequels. And now there's a 4th member of the popular Kiwi family.
It's a series of New Zealand picture books that have proved popular around the world.
He was a wonky donkey, wonky donkey, wonky donkey, yeah.
The original Wonky Donkey book was released in 2009, but its popularity really exploded a decade later following a viral video featuring a hysterical Scottish grandmother trying to read the book to her family.
He's a stinky dinky lunky wonky donkey winky wonky donkey.
The original title sold more than 2 million copies, encouraging Queenstown-based author Craig Smith and illustrator Katz Cowley to create 2 sequels, and now a 4th instalment is being released.
Dinky Donkey came out in 2019, and 2020 was Granny Granny's turn, and this is the Wonky Donkey's big surprise turn.
The character inspired an award-winning song. Smith's donkey creation saw him touring all over the world until COVID curtailed those adventures.
So obviously the touring, live touring that is had to be cut down quite significantly over the last couple of years. I've still been able to do small bits from time to time, but I've been mainly doing shows for kids online and the Zoom concerts.
Last week, he gave his first live performance in months to a group of school children in Cromwell.
That was an absolute blast to go over and have some fun with the kids and see them singing and see them dancing and enjoying reading.
And he's written a new song to go with the Wonky Donkey's big surprise.
day her daddy Wonky had promised her such a big surprise.
But as for what that big surprise is, Smith says you'll just have to read the book. In Queenstown, The South Today.
Dunedin sports graphic guru Sir Ian Taylor needed to attend a meeting with Major League Baseball earlier this week. He's able to fly to the US and back as part of a trial of a new scheme that allows people to avoid the MIQ lottery and its associated delays.
Flying into the COVID-19 storm, Dunedin businessman Sir Ian Taylor gets ready to travel to Los Angeles via Auckland. On his trip to LA and back, he'll be using this new machine that can test saliva for COVID in just 30 minutes.
I think we need far more testing regimes to actually deal with the way the world's moving.
It was only a month ago that Sir Ian was introduced to this high-speed COVID testing machine created by Dunedin firm Microgem. He says the New Zealand government has to keep up with improved detection methods to help fight the disease.
So on Friday I had one of the government's PCR tests. I still don't have the result for that, and it's Monday. I guess it'll get texted through sometime. Other people get them within 24 hours, but there's a whole range, 24 hours to 5 days. And that's not a great test. If you test on this day and 5 days later, you've got your result, but for 5 days you could have called it again.
Sir Ian is also part of a privately funded trial to bypass the MIQ lottery and use the latest technologies so he can go into privately managed isolation. And that's something he says the government also needs to take notice of.
I know of 20 people, business people, who are overseas and have no way back. You know, the economic engine that drives the country, that pays for the nurses, pays for the doctors, pays for the teachers, actually pays for the politicians. That economic engine has got to keep running, and it can't run efficiently if people who need to go overseas can't get there and get back.
Sir Ian's trip will see him meet with the organisers of Major League Baseball with a return flight to Auckland next Monday. In Dunedin, The South Today.
Coming up after the break on Southern Newsweek, fashion in the field goes ahead on Melbourne Cup Day, and a stuffed polar bear comes up for auction. Welcome back. Melbourne Cup Day at Wingatui looked a little different this year. In pre-COVID times, tens of thousands of people enjoyed race events across the country and in Australia. But here in Dunedin, crowd restrictions were evident at a very quiet race day.
COVID-safe crowds making the most of Melbourne Cup events this afternoon at the Wingatui racecourse.
Today's been terrific. We've got quite a number of people here, but COVID, of course, has restricted us in what we do. But we wanted to do something. We wanted to have a great event. We wanted to celebrate Melbourne Cup.
Social distancing measures restricting revellers in the marquees and also in place on the popular Fashions on the Field event.
I'm pretty stoked actually. I've been competing for about 6 years and I've never had a win, so very happy that Wingatui Racecourse has made it happen for me.
The event, which usually draws crowds of up to 4,000 people, instead hosted around 700 today. There was a win for fashionistas this year, as last year's fashion competition was cancelled altogether due to COVID-19. However, there were many health-related guidelines.
Everybody has to do their part with COVID, so we've got some really strong guidelines from New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing, which will work very well to set the standard of what we've got to do.
Event planner Samantha Lambert says the contestants practiced social distancing, using the lawn space to make the catwalk possible under restrictions. Fashion on the Field winner Andre Callahan says, on days like this, it's all about the hats.
What you need to be very careful about is your millinery when it's windy. So any wide brim hats obviously want to take off in the wind. So I went safe this year and have gone for more of a headband.
The Otago Racing Club says the limited guests this year included club members, horse owners and hospitality, all separated into 5 different areas to maximise attendees. In Dunedin, The South Today.
A well-known Dunedin screen printing business, Uptown Art, is changing hands due to the retirement of its founder. Stu McCormick started the business nearly 40 years ago and just spent his last day at work this week.
This week didn't start in a typical way at Uptown Art. The man who started the Dunedin business announced he's leaving.
It's a very hard decision for me, personally. Leslie was ready to go earlier than I was, but she's more sensible than me. But because I love what I do, it was a very hard decision to make.
McCormick set up Uptown Art in 1983 as a screen printing business, after deciding to take control of his signwriting and screen printing career. Over nearly 4 decades, the company's supplied goods to international rugby teams and even printed a shirt for snooker legend Eddie Charlton. But it's another highlight which stands out for McCormick.
Big highlight was meeting my wife. She came to work for us as an administrator, and that was 30 years ago. And we've been together, well, for about 25 years, I suppose.
They're currently in a handover period with the new owners, but admits the couple will miss working. Proprietor and designer Alison Winlock sees a bright future for the well-known Dunedin business.
We're really excited to get into something new, I guess, and we saw potential with Dunedin being a bit of a hive of activity over the next few years with everything that's going on construction-wise.
A team of 4 families teamed up to buy the business, each bringing their own unique set of skills. McCormick is confident he's leaving his creation in good hands. And while methods remain the same, screen printing inks have changed over the years, with solvent or turpentine-based inks on the way out.
We are going to have a bit of a focus on sort of greener business practices, looking at becoming carbon neutral and sort of assessing suppliers and things like that, making it a bit more of a focus because there's definitely greener ways of doing business.
Uptown Art's had a few locations over the years, with the new team aiming to keep the machines busy at their Leith Street premises. In Dunedin, the South Today.
If you're thinking a polar bear standing upright in the corner of your living room could be a good idea, then you're in luck. There'll be one going under the hammer at Proctor's auctions later this month. But be warned, another polar bear sold for $44,000 earlier this year.
Wildlife for sale. Dunedin's Proctor Auctions is preparing a range of stuffed and preserved animals to go under the hammer later this month. The collection includes all sorts of exotic wildlife, including a taxidermied juvenile giraffe, mounted trophy heads, and the skins of big cats.
80% of the heads that you see on the wall have come from one collector, and then other pieces have come from all over New Zealand, or from Auckland down really, all over the place.
Among the 200-odd items set to go under the hammer is the rear end of a zebra and this fearsome-looking polar bear. The auction house sold a similar bear earlier this month for $44,000, but manager Ronnie Proctor won't speculate on how much this one might go for.
Polar bears are a bit of an attraction, so for some reason they're coming out of the woodwork, so it is hard to say what they'll go for. It just really depends on what someone's prepared to pay.
Proctor hopes some of the items might go into museum collections, but he says there's been a growing interest among the general public to have an exotic specimen of wildlife on display in their lounge or hallway.
It's had a bit of a resurgence over the last couple of years. I think you find that people are respecting the animals and yeah.
The auction is set for Sunday the 21st of November. In Dunedin, the South Today.
And that wraps up this edition of Southern Newsweek. For the latest news from the Southern region, head online to odt.co.nz. And you can follow Channel 39 on Facebook and YouTube. Like and subscribe to be notified of Southern news as it happens. Ka kite anō.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.